Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the Minneapolis Theater Garage and this afternoon's panel discussion, which is sponsored by Once Upon a Crime Mystery Books and the Mysterious Press. My name is Bruce Southworth. I review mysteries for Once Upon a Crime, other publications, primarily Sherlockian publications. I'll be your moderator this afternoon and introducing the 6 authors. Excuse me. Today's event is being filmed or videotaped by Hennepin County Library, and as some of you may know, they produce such programs as Northern Lights and Insights, which feature local authors, and a discussion which features national authors on tour. These are broadcast on regional cable channel 6, and then the tapes are put into the Hennepin County Library system. So if you know of anybody who wasn't able to be here today, sometime in the future they'll be able to see this whole thing. Well, it's a great pleasure and a very great privilege, actually, also to have the distinguished panel that we have with us today. And I'd like to bring out each of the authors individually and have them kind of fill in as we go. First, K.K.Beck, Catherine Beck. Her current book is called Amateur Night, featuring her investigator, Jane De Silva. It's Ms. Beck's 10th novel, which this is the second in the series, which started with A Hopeless Case, published in 1992. Among her other works are Death in a Deck Chair, Murder in a Mummy Case, Peril Under the Palms, all of these books featuring sleuth Iris Cooper. Ms. Beck lives in Seattle, does magazine editing when she's not looking for hopeless cases for Jane De Silva to solve. Next is James Crumley, whose current book is The Mexican Tree Duck, featuring C.W. Shugru, and I hope I'm getting that right, because I'm sure he'll tell me if I'm not. It's the second C.W. Shugru novel. The first was The Last Good Kiss, published about a decade ago. Mr. Crumley has taught English and creative writing in Montana, Arkansas, Colorado, Oregon, Pennsylvania, which accounts for sort of the all-continental flavor of some of his books. The characters bounce around. Some of his other books include One to Count Cadence, The Wrong Case, The Last Good Kiss, and Dancing Bear. The last 3 are actually considered crime novels. Next, excuse me, Mr. Peter Lovesey, whose current book is Diamond Solitaire, a sequel to The Last Detective, which features Peter Diamond, who's the former detective superintendent in Bath, England. Mr. Lovesey is very well known for his Sergeant Cribb series set in the Victorian era, for which he and his wife, Jacqueline, wrote the screenplays when they were filmed by Granada TV for public broadcasting system. Mr. Lovesey is a former teacher, now a full-time writer, and has won many awards for his crime fiction, including the Gold and Silver Dagger Awards from the British Crime Writers Association. His first novel was Wobble to Death, published in 1970, and won him the Macmillan Panther First Crime Novel Award of £1,000. Not an inconsiderable sum in those days. Next, Marcia Muller, who is quoted as being the founding mother of contemporary female private investigators, and we may get into that as we go. Her current book is Wolf in the Shadows, featuring Sharon McCone. It's the 14th Sharon McCone novel. The first appeared in 1977. Ms. Muller has written 20 novels, including the 14 Sharon McCone novels, and numerous short stories. She's edited numerous anthologies, many with Bill Pronzini. We have also with us Mr. Jack O'Connell, whose current book is Wireless. It's his second novel. It features, among other wild and interesting characters, Hannah Shaw, who is a police investigator in a New England town, who, you might say with Hannah, is somewhat like Poe, who's haunted by a lost Lenore, and we'll get into that a little bit later as well, I'm sure. His first novel was called Box 9, and he won the Mysterious Press Discovery Award from Warner Mysterious Press in 1990. And last, but certainly not least, is Mr. Paco Taibo, whose current book, No Happy Ending, features Hector Shane. I'm not going to try the middle name, I apologize. There you have it. Mr. Taibo is a full-time writer, former professor of history at Metropolitan University in Mexico City. He's president of the International Association of Crime Writers. He's won that group's Hammett Award 2 times. He's written probably more historical-oriented work than crime fiction. But some of his other Hector Shane books, which are available in the United States, include Some Clouds, Shadow of the Shadow, and An Easy Thing. Most of the, all of the books that are current that the authors are having here today are available outside, and I believe quite a few of the backstock is also available. What we'd like to do, now that we've got everybody up front, is give each of them a chance to read a selection from their book, 3 or 4 minutes or so. After that, we'll do a discussion of some ideas and see if we can get things kind of hopping. And after that, we'll open the questions up to the audience, and you can field whatever you want to say to the authors. Okay? So do we have a volunteer, or should we just go alphabetically down the line for who wants to start? Backwards. Good idea.
We go alphabetically backwards.
Alphabetically backwards. How about that, Paco? What do you think?
The poor Mexican. I knew this was going to happen. I knew this was going to happen because I don't like reading in English.
Somebody should have warned you in advance, right?
Yes, but anyway, I don't like reading in English because this is not my language, it's the language of the translator. And even it's a good translator, I think so, and even it's a good translation, it's not my words. So I feel kind of reading somebody else's work, you know? Mainly because the Spanish comes back to me when I'm reading in English, and I found that it's better in Spanish. Anyway. Sorry, my accent, English is not my language, as I told you. It's the only one, the only English I had is this one, so you must afford it. Nothing belonged to us, nothing at all. The city had become foreign to us. The earth beneath our feet was no longer our own. Neither was the nasty little breeze that turned up our jacket collars at 8 o'clock at night when we didn't have anywhere to go, when we had no saint with whom to take refuge. The city was no longer our own, not even in its sounds. Unfamiliar sounds in back streets illuminated by storefronts and street lights every 22 yards, covered by islands of darkness you still couldn't hide in, exposed to the revealing headlights of passing cars. That night in which nothing was our own, after which nothing would belong to us ever again. This country, our homeland, closed itself to us, reduced to the spoils of petty opportunists, cheats and liars, a cynics dressed up in words that no one believed anymore, words spoken out of force of habit. The country sent the defeated out into the sewers, into the endless night, walking and walking, hoping to win a few hours in this race with fear, walking without a compass, without ever hoping to arrive, hoping never to arrive. Our Lady of the lightless hours, protect us. Lady of the night, watch over us because we are not among the worst that is left to this city, and yet we have nothing, we are worth nothing. We aren't of this place, nor do we know how to go to another place from which to yearn from those abandoned streets, the afternoon sun, banana licuados, tacos with salsa verde, the Zócalo on the 16th of September, the baseball diamond in Cuauhtémoc Stadium, the Christmas specials on Channel 4, this terrible loneliness that torments us with this stubborn and this awful fear that forgives nothing. It's better in Spanish.
Maybe you'd want to give us a sentence or two in Spanish to give you the flavor. You want to do that?
No, I don't have the book with me.
Okay. Thought I'd offer. Jack, how about you?
Mine's better in Spanish, too.
We'll be the judge of that.
You'll just have to imagine. A good number of the old churches in Quinsigamond have found other uses. These big, dark houses of God have been turned into nightclubs and restaurants, a museum, a weight training salon, and these weird upscale condos for the city's nouveau riche Europhiles. It was a big fad that peaked maybe 5 years back. Developers were grabbing the churches on the point of absolute decay, abandoned monsters whose parishioners had died out or moved on. For a while, every hustler with a real estate license was trying to find a way to target St. Brendan's, Quinsigamond's only cathedral. But the diocese held out. The bishop refused all offers. St. Brendan's was still a legitimate parish, even if the bulk of its worshippers were outpatients from Toth Care Facility, tethered to their pews by a pocketful of lithium. Now the market's gone bad, and more than one builder has filed Chapter 11. St. Brendan's looks like it's outlasted another trend. Spear sits in his car in the church lot and stares up at the structure. How could they want to desecrate such a thing?
Thank you. Marcia?
The Mesa was the most desolate place I'd ever seen. I climbed out of the Scout and followed my guide across rock-strewn ground where nothing but mesquite and spiny chala cactus grew. The morning was overcast, the air saturated with salt-laden moisture, spitty weather we used to call it. The wind blew sharp and icy off the flat gray sea. Ahead of us, where the ground dropped off to distant ranch lands, stood the tumble-down adobe hut. My guide, Andre, stopped several yards from it and waited for me to join him. "There is where it happened," he said in a hushed voice. I looked at the hut, felt nothing. It was simply a relic of a bygone time, crumbling now into the earth that had formed it. I started toward it, then glanced back at my companion. He stood, arms folded, staring resolutely at the Pacific. Superstitious, I thought, and kept on going. The hut had no roof, and two of the walls leaned in on each other at abnormal angles. I stepped through an opening where a door had once been, onto a packed dirt floor. Loose bricks were scattered underfoot and trash drifted in the corners. Fire had blackened the pale clay. I still didn't feel anything. No more loss or grief, no sense of horror, none of the emotional shockwaves that surged through me at the scene of a violent death, even though the death that had happened here should have touched me more deeply than any. "What's wrong with you?" I asked myself. "You can't have used up all your tears in one night." For a few minutes I stood still, looking for something, anything, and willing my emotions to come alive. But there was nothing here, so I turned and went back outside. I felt a tug at the leg of my jeans and glanced down. A little tree, dead now. Poor thing hadn't stood a chance in this inhospitable ground. A few crumpled papers were caught in its brittle branches. I brushed them away. Rest in peace.
Sometimes when you're writing a book, characters do unexpected things. And my character, Peter Diamond, in the first book I wrote about him called The Last Detective, resigned from the police. It was rather out of my control. And when I came to write a second book, I had to find him a job to do. He became a security man in Harrods department store in London. And now he's in trouble again. "You're sacking me." Peter Diamond, the guard responsible for Section 9 on the night the child was found, spoke without rancor. "I know the score." The score was heavily against him. He wasn't young. 48, according to his file. Married, living in West Ken, no kids, an ex-policeman. He'd got to the rank of detective superintendent and then resigned from Avon and Somerset over some dispute with the assistant chief constable. A misunderstanding, someone said. Someone who knew someone. Diamond had been too proud to ask for his job back. After quitting the police, he'd taken a series of part-time jobs and finally moved to London and joined the Harrods team. "I shouldn't say this, Peter," the security director told him, "but you're bloody unlucky. Your record here has been exemplary apart from this. You could have looked forward to a more senior post." Rules are rules. Unfortunately, yes, we'll do the best we can in the way of a reference, but security jobs are out. "Right," said Diamond. He was inscrutable. Fat men, and he was fat, often have faces that seem on the point of turning angry or amused. The trick is to guess which. The director didn't mind exhibiting his own unease. He shook his head and spread his hands in an attitude of helplessness. "Believe me, Peter, I feel sick to the stomach about this." "Spare me that." "I mean it. I'm not confident I would have spotted the kid myself. She was practically invisible under the cushions." "I lifted the cushions," Diamond admitted. "Oh?" She wasn't on that sofa when I did my round. I definitely checked. I always do. It's an obvious place to plant a device. The kid must have been somewhere else and got under them later. How could you have missed her? I reckon I took her for one of the cleaners' kids. They bring them in sometimes. Some of them are Vietnamese. She's Japanese, I think. Diamond snapped out of his defeated mood. You think? Hasn't she been claimed? Not yet. Doesn't she know her name? Hasn't spoken a word since she was found. Over at the Nick, they spent the whole of today with a string of interpreters trying to coax her to say something. Not a syllable. She isn't dumb, is she? Apparently not, but she says nothing intelligible. There's almost no reaction from the child. Deaf? No, she reacts to sound. It's a mystery.
When the 312 through freight to Spokane hit the East Meriwether crossing, the engineer touched his horn and released a long, mournful wail into the wet, snowy air of our second early fall storm in western Montana. It sounded a hell of a lot like the first note of a Hank Snow ballad. I slipped the dolly from under the jukebox and plugged it into the extension cord. When I dropped a quarter into the slot, the large machine burped, the bubbling neon tubes glowed softly in the night, and the machine seemed to settle more solidly onto the railroad tracks. You sure you know what you're doing, Shigru? Lawyer Rainbow asked, squatting beside the roadbed. Hey, man, I don't even know if this supposed rock and roll guy, I don't even know who this supposed rock and roll guy is, and I don't even care if he sings like a girl, but I've shaken hands with Hank Snow, by God. I waved the damaged tequila bottle across the white space of the parking lot toward the back of the hell-roaring liquor store and lounge, shook his hands right over there, and they ain't got no right to take him off the jukebox. Solly took the tequila from me, had a hit, and then handed it back. He glanced up, smiling, huge snowflakes melting in his shaggy blonde hair. Which one is he, Solly asked. All those country and western singers sound like girls to me. So we knelt together as the engine came around the long curve at the base of the Devil's Hump, its brilliant headlamp whimpering through the snow-cursed night, knelt and snorted speed off the circular scar in his palm. Then I stood up shakily and stepped onto the tracks, punched P-17. Solly limped across the parking lot toward the shadowed rear of the bar as the engineer hit his heavy note one more time. When the cowcatcher on the engine pulling the 312 fast freight to Spokane hit the jukebox, the high, thin voice sang one last empty, screaming wail that died quickly beneath the thundering steel wheels. The collision filled the snowy night with an explosive rainbow shower of plastic and pot metal, worthless quarters, and inflated dollar bills that covered the pale parking lot like a hard post-apocalyptic rain of falling. Absolutely perfect, I said to Solly. Hank Snow would be ecstatic. What the hell, man, he said. I suspect Michael Jackson might have liked it too.
Jane Silva had been making a concerted effort to cheer herself up with a low-budget shopping fling at a place she thought of affectionately as the Teen Tart Store. And while Jane knew she shouldn't really be spending any money on clothes right now, and conversely that if she was, she certainly deserved to do it somewhere better than this place, she had managed to assemble a collection of cotton knit items in bright colors that sort of worked because they didn't pretend to be expensive. She also thought she could carry them off reasonably well through sheer force of personality. And the things she'd chosen were basic enough so that it didn't really matter that at 37 she was about 20 years older than the store's target market. It was too bad, however, that she had to run into Bucky Moncrief, of all people, as she was coming out of the place, laden down with big, crinkling white shopping bags of cheap chic. Bucky Moncrief, the ultimate consumer and devotee of perfect tailoring and natural fabrics, didn't even bother to look anything but horrified and embarrassed for her. But then Bucky, tall, handsome, mid-30s, and not without a certain oozy charm, wasn't a particularly nice person. He peered past her and into the store, over the electronic gate meant to catch shoplifted merchandise with buzzers and alarms. At the counter, a teenage girl in black wrinkled rayon with henna'd hair and a Morticia Adams complexion slouched sullenly. Grunge rock, a Seattle specialty, droned away. Jane thought she could smell the oily chemical scent of polyester wafting out of the place. "Did you buy something in there?" he said tactlessly. "Sometimes I think too much good taste can be a vulgar thing, don't you?" she said with a big smile. Unfortunately, Bucky was someone she had to be nice to. Bucky worked in his uncle's law firm, Carlson, Throckmorton, Osgood, Stubbins, etc., which happened to be the law firm that had drawn up Uncle Harold's eccentric will. "I'm really sorry the trustees didn't give you your uncle's money," he said. "I've been thinking about you." It had been a couple of weeks since Jane had appealed to the Board of Trustees of Uncle Harold's quaintly named Foundation for Righting Wrongs. The way the will was set up, Jane had to find some hopeless case to solve as a kind of non-profit detective before she could cash in on her inheritance. The trustees, a group of querulous old men, cronies of Uncle Harold, had bounced her first effort on a technicality. "I thought I'd give it another try," she said, trying to sound brave and cheerful and insouciant. She was determined that Bucky, elegant, handsome, well-heeled, over-perfumed, and overconfident Bucky, wouldn't feel sorry for her. "I know, but you really tried so hard and you got beat up and everything," he said. "You must be pretty discouraged. I feel sorry for you." A look that closely resembled sympathy passed over his smooth brow. "I'm fine, really," she lied, wondering if Bucky wanted her to start sniffling a little and collapse on his shoulder. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She deflected his half-hearted offer of coffee and tried not to let the encounter unsettle her. When he'd first met her and it looked like she was coming into a fortune, he'd been extremely attentive. Bucky was clearly one of those smug people who didn't like to be around failure, she thought. They were often the same people who'd made it with a great deal of help from their relatives. Well, Uncle Harold had tried to help her. It was out of respect for him, she felt, that the board had given her a few $1,000s to tide her over. But it had occurred to her that she might have to get some kind of a job if another suitable hopeless case didn't come up soon. She imagined herself holding a sheaf of oversized menus and saying, "Smoking or non?" in a dignified voice to restaurant patrons, which wouldn't be the end of the world, as long as she didn't have to do it forever. Jane was plagued by habitual restlessness. She went back home, home being Uncle Harold's gloomy old house on Capitol Hill. The board let her live there for now. It was an asset of the foundation. If Jane found a case the board liked, she planned to completely redo the place, refinish the nice wood details, now covered in dark varnish, prune the overgrown camellias and let in some light, get rid of the pink formica counters in the kitchen. On the porch, she heard the phone ring and managed to get inside and pick it up in about 3 rings. "Jane, Calvin Mason here." "Oh," she said breathlessly. Her adrenaline was still pumping from the experience of standing on the porch shifting packages and jamming the key into the lock while the phone rang within the house. "You still looking for a hopeless case?" "Desperately," she said. She didn't have to put on an act for Calvin like she did for Bucky. "There might be some new evidence in a case of mine. I represented this guy who was convicted, and now a juror says we all overlooked something." "Sounds wonderful," she said. "Maybe. You want to know what I feel, deep in my heart, speaking as the guy's attorney and as a human being? There's no doubt in my mind. My client is clearly guilty as hell."
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Gives you a little taste, a little flavor of what these novels are like. And that leads me into a kind of a generic first question that I'd like to pose to whoever wants to start off. Because you all are very different writers, very different styles. The characters speak with such different voices, yet you're all considered crime writers. And what I was wondering is there some common denominator which defines a crime novel or that a crime writer uses to create crime fiction? Is there, because of the variety we've got, what's the common denominator among these 6 novels?
There's a crime in it.
There's a crime in it, okay. We'll take that as a starting point. Anything else?
Yeah, the spine of the story is crime. You look at the society, you look at the surroundings through crime. Crime erupts and creates a perspective.
Crime becomes the perspective of the novel. And And that's how the detective is perceiving society through that crime sometimes, or?
The detective, the reader, the writer.
I think you could say they're novels of transgression. Somebody has transgressed.
Gone
and
beyond
that's the
its-
impetus for the plot, I think.
And this is probably a trite thing to say so, but it's true of crime fiction and mystery fiction generally. That is that the plots are all resolved by the end, that things are tied up, that you begin to have some understanding of what it was all about by the last chapter. That isn't necessarily true of the so-called mainstream novels.
Okay. So things end up in a no happy ending. I don't know, quite fits into that character.
There's another thing, the idea of investigation, the idea of an investigation inside the book. Each one of our books has an investigation. When you go into a search, into an investigation, you investigate more than you think you are investigating. You are looking for the end of the story, the origins of a story. But also you create an investigation on the society that produces that story, on the atmosphere that is surrounding that story, on the characters that are acting in that story. So the idea of investigation, it's the perfect way for a writer to go into a story.
And talk about the society. Jack, what do you think? Because in Wireless, Hannah is certainly investigating crimes, but from my reading, that's kind of a background thing going on with some of the other characters and things that are developing. So is that critical?
That's
to
because
know?
I'm so bad at plotting.
No.
No, I think I agree with something Paco said last night, which was that he wasn't a big believer in sort of genre separation, to begin with. There are, good books and interesting books and bad books that are less interesting. And, these happen to have, these books on this table happen to have crimes in them as a thread to sort of hang the motions of the characters we care about on.
That's a direction I was curious about going to. Did I interrupt?
Well, no, I was just going to say, Jack's book has a lot from the point of view of the transgressor, and that's maybe a subcategory of things from the point of view of the perpetrator.
You certainly do get an interesting perspective. We don't give too much away here and talk too specific about the books, but his perpetrator writes long letters in the book to his ex-wife.
That's right.
And it's very interesting because while he's doing very nasty things in this book, he sounds very, very rational, which makes him all the more of a scary character.
My detectives commit more crimes than the criminals.
That's
And have more fun at it, too.
I did read somewhere that you had made that comment that your private investigators are far more comfortable with criminals than in the sort of middle class norm. One thing, kind of veering off that a little bit, just to springboard, do the things that you want to say about society, perhaps in Paco's case, the structure of things in the paramilitary organization that's still in use, the crime, the transgressors or the thread, the perpetrators that runs through the novel, is that kind of a means to an end to be able to say other things about what's going on in society?
There are no other things. There
Okay.
are the things you have to...
I would expect that from Jack, since he's dealing with anarchists.
No. When you write a crime fiction story, there's no pretext. You are not writing crime fiction because you want to be an important and obsessive writer trying to go in deep into society. It's just that these are the stories. These stories are linked. Crime and society are linked, so they appear at the same time. When I'm writing, I'm not trying to do any kind of pedagogic work inside my books. I'm not trying to convince anybody or to create a legend. Just the stories come together. They show together. They appear together. They work together. There's an interrelation between the small crime and the society. And I work that through atmospheres and stories. It's very important for me to create the city as a space, as character, and that comes together.
Would it be fair to characterize still characterize perhaps crime fiction or mystery fiction as escapist fiction then, just stories?
To escape to where? To escape to which place? There's no place to escape. There are no more islands in this world. There's no way to escape. Even the most peaceful place has lots of aliens, and their own aliens that doesn't look like, but they are really the real ones, and there's no way to escape. Nobody can escape.
Well, they can try, and I'll be glad to try and help them.
Those readers, I'm not interested in them. The readers are trying to escape. It's like trying to be a children after 15 years old. It's very difficult to do it. Some people is trying to, but well, that's their trouble, not mine.
Marcia, how about you? What do you think about that?
I think that the crime novel has become more and more a novel of character. And the characters that are created in the novels are a reflection of society as a whole. Some may be lighter than the others, some may be more sinister, but crime fiction really is reflecting the whole spectrum of what we're seeing before us in the world.
So we see more and more flawed people essentially showing up, both as the antagonist and protagonist in the books.
I would say not so much flawed as more and more in-depth. The characters are being developed with multiple layers. We don't have types like the butler and the person dead on the library floor. We've got representations of real people here, and as such, real reflections of what our world is really like.
How about Shugru in kind of in that definition? He's certainly a multi-layered person. He doesn't fit into sort of the middle class norms. Is he was he created sort of with that intent, or was he reaction to other things that were going on? Or am I way off?
Well, when you talk about, Paco's novels illustrating a paramilitary organization in Mexico that keep dissent down and keep various political stances down, I don't think that America's all that much different than Mexico, and so that I've always been political, and I've always thought of what I write as political novels, and so. Shugru is deliberately anti-middle class. He's anti-hypocrisy. He's anti-lies, and he's certainly anti, the kind of law which is made up out of whole cloth, out of the middle of America. I don't know. The other day I heard Dr. Dean Adele say that if alcoholism is a disease, how come crack addiction is a crime? Of course, the answer to that is racism. And so, if my novels are offensive politically or personally or economically, that's on purpose. I hope that answers your question.
I think it does.
If I may say so, I think what is becoming very obvious is that it's rather unproductive, really, to try to sort of draw general conclusions from 6 very different books written by 6 very different people. You've only got to look along this line and see how different we all are in appearance, and you read our books and you'll find they're even more different.
That's fair. Let's approach and move on to maybe some safe ground. How about this? Since we're comparing apples, oranges, bananas, and so on, perhaps. Let's kind of look at what you write in terms of what influenced you. Did you, any of you, I'm curious as to who you might have had as influences, either as people that you were reacting against or people you said you had liked to commemorate that person or to like to write that person, or that person was a mentor in some way. Who were influences in your writing when you were starting out?
You won't believe me, so I
go ahead.
pass the word.
No, go ahead.
Really, when I when I think that's something coming out from one of the books that it's not mine, that's that real sense of influence, no? When sometimes you feel that somebody else is in your book, is not you, is somebody else, it's John Dos Passos. And it's a bad John Dos Passos, not a good one, because influence goes through yourself, doesn't go direct. And it's also Spanish poets of the 50s. And in the last, at the end, maybe some kind of irrational thinking that I found in Chester Himes, and some rational thinking I found in Simenon, in Maigret novels. Those both things that can play like a scale, the irrational thinking in Chester Himes, the irrationality of violence that I feel in Mexican society all the time, and the rationality of Simenon, this soft rationality, middle-class soft rationality that's also in my society. Those things, suddenly I saw them in my books and I said, gosh, how they came here, how they arrived here. And also something that is far than that, that's Emilio Salgari adventure novels, pirate novels that I read when I was 16 years old, the idea of the romantic adventure. Also in some things that sound like echoes of Byron or Spanish romantic poets like Espronceda. I can hear those echoes in my writing. I said, you always want to be unique, the one and only, as they used to say of the dog of Jose Feliciano, no? The one and only, and the dog appear in the scenario. Everybody saw that. No, nobody saw it. Just in Mexico we see that kind of things. When they say the one and only, and the guy that was presenting Jose Feliciano, everybody knows who Jose Feliciano is. Well, at least. The guy who was presenting Jose Feliciano said, and now the one and only, and suddenly the dog appeared in the scenery. So I decided that was the one and only, no? And yes, well, one is the dog in the scenery, the one and only. And this idea that influences are not the things you want to, but the things that they decided to be in your life. So you don't decide which writer are going to create an influence in your life. Sometimes a writer decides for yourself. That's why I love books, because they are alive.
I would agree with that. That's an interesting, very interesting exposition. I would agree. In your case, Marcia, I was curious if your influence, as the quote that I used, I think came from a 20th Century Crime Writers reference, was an influence to get away from the male author, male sleuth-based, if that was a conscious kind of a thing, if it was an influence to do something else?
It wasn't in reaction to the male sleuths at all. I would say that Raymond Chandler and Ross MacDonald were probably the strongest influences on me. But I simply could not imagine writing through the eyes of a male. I'm not male. I wouldn't know how to go about being one. So Sharon McCone is female simply because I am.
There seem to be more and more male authors writing female characters, even some female writing as male characters. It would kind of mess my mind up. I would have no idea how a person could do that. Anybody else want to jump in, and just out of curiosity?
Well, only to say that in my case, I think the big influence was the lure of money. You mentioned at the beginning.
An honest man.
Yeah, well, you mentioned at the beginning that there was a prize competition, and that was it. I read very little mystery fiction before then. I think I'd gone through the Sherlock Holmes stories and read about one Agatha Christie, and it was simply seeing that £1,000 was on offer, and that was more than my salary then as a teacher. So that was the big incentive, and has remained so, really. Yes.
A continuing honest man. Catherine, how about you?
I think, well, I loved Nancy Drew as a child, and I loved Agatha Christie, and I loved Sherlock Holmes, and I loved anybody who did something about this feeling I had that real life was not quite as exciting as it should be, and needed a little improvement in the pacing department. And I think I was also influenced by somebody that I respect very much. Isn't a writer at all, but is Alfred Hitchcock, because and one of the best sort of textbooks on suspense and how to deal with it is a book that where François Truffaut interviews Alfred Hitchcock, and they go movie by movie. And there's a lot to be learned there about pacing and suspense. Hitchcock did just such a beautiful job of constructing these things. He'd started out life as an engineer, but at the same time he managed to address the problems of evil at the same time in a very elegant way. So that's somebody who I respect very much.
Hitchcock also managed to do it with quite a sense of humor,
That's right.
which I
Just
think is...
at just the right time. I think that's part of the pace, the tension relief
Mhm.
kind of thing.
And that's evident, I think, in these books as well, that you have to build to a certain point, break, and so on. Talking about something that Paco mentioned, the society and crime fiction, or the things going together. But I was just wondering, and I want to start out with Jack, if I could, because in Wireless we have a sort of sense of order. I mean, at the beginning of the book, things are pretty well in place. There's allegiances, alliances, treaties, and so on. And as things go on, there's lots of cracks that start appearing throughout the walls. Splinter groups, various gangs show up, and so on. And I'm wondering if one of the aspects, perhaps merely of Wireless or perhaps other books, is a reflection of society sort of spinning out of order. An increase in a chaotic nature of things?
Yeah, I'd absolutely say so. I think, on a personal level, I think it's a pretty personal reflection of sort of what I've seen happen to my own hometown, over 30-some-odd years of growing up. From childhood, it had clearly a childhood perspective of having, tremendous order. It may not have been as ordered as it seemed. Certainly it was at least more ordered than it is today. The effects of the economy and various societal changes have made it an almost unrecognizable landscape to what my, say, grandfather would have perceived it as. I think it's also just a reflection of just a splintering in every form of popular culture, everything sort of seems to... All these art forms that seem to used to work by rules, over the past 20 years, probably the rules have been dispensed with. I personally, feel like that's a good thing. I sort of enjoy that kind of thing. But I think all of that found its way into the book.
We have some rule breakers here, too. Yeah, Paco.
No, order and chaos, the two words are ringing. This idea that in the origins, crime fiction or mystery fiction pretend to put order in chaos, no? To create a kind of simple order. The idea that you can manage situations and there's somebody who's going to fix but this kind of order is the order that a girl can put in the dollhouse, no? You here and you here. Now it's time for soup, etc. This is what Agatha Christie is for me, a girl playing with dolls, no? This kind of order. When I go into crime fiction 15 years ago, 15 years? Yes, 15 years ago, my idea was trying to put chaos in order. I don't like Mexican order. It's the order of corruption, is the order of authoritarianism. So my idea was trying to put some chaos, perturbing maybe the dreams of the readers, saying there's no solution in this society to the stories, the justice stories you are linked with. So the idea of putting chaos in some chaos in the stories is I love it. Crumley did put a lot of chaos in his stories. I love it. That's why I love his books. Lot of
He
chaos.
was the exact person I was going to
There's
go to
no
next.
order at all surviving after one of his books.
Do you want to pitch anything in there, into that?
No.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
I don't, aside from a decidedly anarchistic political bent and a decided distaste for certain kinds of American hypocrisy, I mostly just tell stories that I like, and I don't tell them because I don't like them. And for people to say that my books aren't plotted is kind of an interesting way criticizing the lack of order. I know exactly what happens. Plot's just a thing. The next rational thing happens. It's just a logical thing. It's not something you make up. Plot. Even your lives have a plot. It's just a causal relationship between events. And although when a jet plane falls out of the sky and lands on you, that's not plot, but it can be funny. I never liked puzzle mysteries either. I never had a desire to read them, much less write them. I thought that I read all of Sherlock Holmes, but I thought that what was going on was a game, and not a very smart game at that. And when people sit down and wonder who done it, I always wonder why they're wondering who done it. Find out who did it, wonder why they did it. I may have read more Ross McDonald than I needed to. I don't know. But there's no accounting for a lot of things. We may have noticed that in modern life.
That's true. That probably connects with what Jack was saying. This breakdown, no accounting for some things. How about the English perspective, Peter? Chaos versus order.
I don't really see it in those terms at all. I think I'm not unashamed to belong to that tradition that began with Agatha Christie, I suppose. Although I don't see myself as writing puzzle stories now, but I think of myself primarily as a storyteller and an entertainer, and I don't really, I think, have any big message to put across. Okay, there may be things about society that are reflected in the books, but that's quite incidental to the story. So I do plot my stories, and for my own sort of confidence, I feel that I need to have a story that is worth working on before I actually begin page one. So I'll spend some time working out a kind of synopsis. And I know, having talked to all my colleagues along the row here, that they don't work in that way. And I've found before that it's pretty unusual. Although you might think on the face of things that mystery writers would need to do that plotting in advance, but I know I'm in a minority.
That is interesting. I would think it would be too, and that's coming just completely from a layman's point of view, that you'd need to know, here's my beginning, here's my middle, here's my end, who did what to who, and all that sort of thing.
Then why you have to write the book if you know what's the end, the beginning,
But theoretically,
the pleasure in writing and discovering?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, that's just antagonizing a little to create some kind of warmth here.
It's like walking the high wire without a net. It doesn't count if there's a net there.
So you see, most of the rest of you then just kind of let the thing flow, and what bubbles up, and where it goes, it goes.
That means you have to write the book 3 times. Go and go back and go in and go back to fix the things that doesn't finally go into the structure. I don't like the puzzles, these Ravensburger puzzles, German, the big ones, 3,000 pieces. I hate them. I love the ones that have passed through my daughter. So there are 5 pieces missing. There's one that doesn't belong to that puzzle. It's another one. Because life is like that. Life is like that. All my life I live with puzzles with pieces that doesn't belong to, with pieces that are round instead, and with pieces from other people's puzzles that goes into my life. So that's the way I like writing.
It sounds like that could be sort of the ultimate influence in mystery fiction. It's just trying to take all the 3 or 4 different puzzles that don't have all the pieces or missing pieces and trying to mesh the whole thing together. That's a very apt analogy. Yeah.
Jack? No, not the Mexican again, Jack.
No, I just thought you had something else to say,
I
Jack.
put my theory
Anybody
about
want to jump in? No? Everybody's just going to be kind of nice and quiet.
I'll say something about puzzle mysteries. The puzzle mystery, the kind that were written in the 1930s, very few people are writing those anymore, and very few people would put up with them. I mean, if you go back and read an S.S. Van Dyne, for instance, I mean, they were extremely stylized, and people are still writing puzzle kind of mysteries, and some of them are insufferably arch, and But at the same time, readers really demand more character, even if it's of a kind of a sketchy, kind of quick brushstrokes kind of thing than they used to get in those old classics. So when I wrote a series of books set in the 1920s as a kind of a pastiche, I couldn't do it in the actual style of the 1920s. It had to seem like it was the style of the 1920s. But for modern readers, the pacing had to be different, and it had to be sketched in a little bit more, less brittle and arch, I would say, in tone. They were creakier then. That doesn't mean I still don't think that they have a great deal of charm, and the fact that people still buy them indicates that there's something there. I'm not talking about Agatha Christie because I think she had a lot more fluidity and flexibility, but some of those old things are still in print, and people still like them. But nobody's really publishing anything that much of a puzzle mystery today.
There's a kind of a distinction between the style. I'm kind of in your shadow, sorry, or you're in.
That's all right. I'm sure my pupils are completely dilated here.
No, actually.
Or the other way around, I forget how it goes.
What I was thinking is that in writing a book about characters who exist in the 1920s or 1916 or something like that, you still have to create real characters, whatever style they're presented in.
That's right.
As real people, they still have to have all the depth of real people,
well,
whether it's...
You decide in this field how much depth you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to do various depths. There's no depth that you have to go to. You can decide how stylized you want to make these things. And some of the very darkest, most noir books are extremely stylized, and so are some of the more traditional British style ones. And very few of them, I believe, are realistic. Very few of them. Because real life is much more banal than these books. And so even the very gritty, hardcore kinds of things are just as stylized, but they manage to create the illusion of gritty realism. So I think it's a stylized form no matter what you say you're really doing.
Whatever that style may be.
What do you do with writers like Jim Thompson, for instance? I mean, where do you locate Jim Thompson on the scale of character, puzzle, time? I mean, we're talking about the depths of a guy's twisted mind. You know, perfectly ordinary guy in life, but in his writing, nobody else has ever written anything quite that crazy. And you know, they went out of print for a long time, but now they're all back in print, and they sell quite well. I'm not sure what place that holds. I read Jim Thompson after I started writing detective novels, and so I don't think of him as an influence, or neither him nor Charlie Willeford. But I think I understand the depth of that twistedness, and the French were the first to sort of to see that.
And they also like Patricia Highsmith, I think, for the same reason.
Yeah. Now there's another sort of like.
To me, those books, which are very, very powerful, and I like Jim Thompson and I like Patricia Highsmith, are really sort of explorations of evil. Or if you don't believe in evil as I do, maybe explorations of the twists and turns.
Something, and it's funny, they translate really nicely to the, I can't think, what's the name of the film that they made out of Pop 1280?
The French one?
Yeah, Coup de Torchon?
Vuelta de tuerca, Coup de Torchon.
Yeah. You know, and then they moved it to equatorial South Africa, or East Africa, and they made they just made the movie almost directly from the novel. It was just marvelous. It was a kind of universality to madness and evil that you can't really find anyplace else. And also that kind of sense of humor that while the world is falling apart around you and while people are doing really disgusting and mean and awful things to each other, you still found time to make you laugh at it. And I think there's I guess what I object to in the puzzle mysteries and those sorts of things is that for me, reading and writing a book is an intellectual exercise, and that I certainly like to be entertained as well as the next person. I'm not leaning toward writing entertainment. I hope I make people uncomfortable.
You did me, but I enjoyed
I
your
love it
book
when I'm
immensely.
doing a reading and somebody bends over in disgust and flees the room.
There's one particular scene, and I won't mention it specifically in your book, which I read to my wife, and she just went, "Oh, good," and I was laughing uncontrollably. So I mean, wonderful the way it affects people differently. But it was tremendous. Well, I really get the sense. I mean, everybody has their groundings and their associations, influences, and so on, and approaches to doing this. But hearkening back to the initial question, there probably isn't much of a real common denominator other than what Jim Crumley said to start with, a crime. And every individual person then just goes with their own particular leanings and outlook on life.
Do you ever get letters from readers? Because I happen to have one in my pocket ready.
Peter, let's hear your letter.
This is the best letter ever.
I got several, actually. Dear Mr. Lovesey, I have read 2 or 3 of your Victorian detective stories about Sergeant Cribb with immense pleasure, but I have not written to thank you because I assumed that you died many years ago. My husband Frank says he thinks you may still be alive. We had quite an argument about it in bed last night. I suppose it does not really matter. But we would be very pleased to have this question cleared up. Yours sincerely, Jennifer Robinson, Mrs. P.S. Just in case, I enclose a stamped addressed envelope.
Did you answer that letter?
Yeah.
What did you say?
Dear Mrs. Robinson, thank you for your query as to whether I am a dead writer. I have sometimes wondered about this myself. But I cannot agree that it does not really matter. It matters to me and my wife says she is sure I'm still breathing. I hope this has cleared up the question without spoiling your enjoyment of the books.
But before we quit this, I'd like to thank Hosmer Brown, particularly of the Minneapolis Theater Garage, for all his help. He's been invaluable here, helping us get it set up and arranged. Also, Sarah Ann Freed and Susan Richmond at Mysterious Press for helping arrange this from the New York end. And also Once Upon a Crime for sponsoring the event here and getting these fine 6 writers here. So.